They're the ones who raise the bar. The ones dedicated to providing care in the most demanding of circumstances. The ones that understand the healing benefits of kindness and compassion. They're the people of Sarah Bush Lincoln, and they set the bar high. Sarah Bush Lincoln, trusted, compassionate care right here close to home.
For over 50 years, Horizon Health has been keeping you and your family healthy. And although some things have changed, Horizon Health's commitment to meet the ever-changing needs of our community has remained the same. Horizon Health, 50 years strong.
Carle is redefining healthcare around you, innovating new solutions and offering all levels of care when and where you need it. Investing in technology and research to optimize healthcare, Carle, with Health Alliance, is always at the forefront to help you thrive.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Being Well. I'm your host, Lacey Spence, and today we are kind of talking about those critical minutes from when someone has a medical emergency and to when the ambulance arrives. So to talk about that, we have joining us today, we have Dr. Michael Smith from Carle. Glad you're with us today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Of course, and so we like to introduce our new guest to the show. So if you could give us a little bit of a background on how you got into what you're doing.
Sure. So I'm an emergency medicine physician at Carle, and I grew up right here in East Central Illinois in a little town called Newman up in Douglas County. I went to college at U of I, and in college decided that medicine might be something I would want to pursue. Not having background in it, I went through EMT training and then became a paramedic, and ultimately ended up in my medical career kind of staying in that niche. So right now I am both a boarded ER doc, and I'm also boarded as an EMS specialist. So in plain English, that means my main career is being the physician for a whole bunch of ambulance services, fire departments, and law enforcement agencies all throughout the region.
So where does your office kind of located? Where do you call home base?
Yeah, so Carle is a large healthcare organization, and we have agencies spread by 125 miles. On a day-to-day basis, my home base office is in Urbana, but we also have offices in Danville and all the way down in Olney, and any given day can have me at a lot of different places throughout the region because we've got nearly 70 member services, and trying to support all of them is a full-time job.
Yeah. So when you talk about your training, can you kind of walk us through what the difference is between EMT and then kind of where you're at now?
Sure. So the courses that we encourage everyone in the public to take part in are the basic afternoon classes of an American Heart Association or American Red Cross CPR class. Teaches you basic first aid, basic immediate rescue of somebody who is suffering a true emergency. Beyond that, there's first responder training, and many of us back from high school are familiar with the lifeguard training that the Red Cross also provides. Once a person steps into a more formal role, be it through a volunteer fire service or even some industrial complexes, then there are more advanced semester-long trainings called first responder or basic EMT. Beyond that, you want to really make this a career, there's training for a couple of years in paramedicine. And paramedicine can be either a standard focused into a job training, or it can actually be an associate's degree training depending on where a person goes to school. But paramedics, as you have here in Charleston, are very highly trained medical professionals able to take care of somebody from the minute an emergency starts until getting them to a hospital. So there's a wide range of training, all the way from a 4-hour afternoon class in basic first aid and CPR, all the way up through true career training like your local first responders have.
So in the time that you have been serving in the medical field, what have you noticed is maybe the most common position that people go into?
Sure. So the thing that I love about medicine is that it is so diverse. Medicine is certainly not only about doctors. Really the backbone of medicine and the backbone of caring for people is nursing. And I think in a very real way, for a patient's experience and a patient's health, nursing is actually the most important profession in delivering care. The allied health professions are also very important: physical therapy, occupational therapy, and then we have technical fields like laboratory phlebotomy, radiology. There are tons and tons of ways that people can get involved in medicine. Certainly EMS is absolutely crucial and is one of our classic first response services in America. And so in keeping our population safe and protected, what I and my EMTs and medics do for a living, I think, is just absolutely essential to society. But there are tons and tons of people all across the country in a wide range of roles, again, from a very basic semester-long training all the way up through the multiple years of school you have to do to finally end up being a physician.
And talking about Carle in general, am I getting this right? It's a level 1 trauma center?
It is a level 1 trauma center,
What
yes,
does that
ma'am.
mean?
So back in the 1960s, the federal government realized that we were having a real problem in the United States with death and disability on America's highways. That is, think back to those classic roadsters of the 1960s, those beautiful old cars. And those beautiful old cars would get on wrecks on our rural highways and have minimal damage to the vehicle, solid steel construction, and fatalities of the people inside, because we didn't have things that we take for granted today, like seat belts, like airbags, like crumple zones that take some of the force of a wreck away from the body of the people inside. So the federal government set up the Department of Transportation actually with in mind the goal of reducing injuries and deaths on the highways. At the same time the Department of Transportation was set up, we also set out a national goal of formalizing and standardizing care across the country, mindful of the hope being the care you receive on a highway in Vermont looks like the care you receive in Michigan. In other words, we want to train people to respond when these accidents happen and then be able to take those victims to a hospital. Along that way, along that journey in medicine, we also want to have a standardized group of people trained specifically in emergency response once you get to the hospital. That is, my primary specialty, emergency medicine, also didn't exist until the 1970s. Going to an ER anywhere in this region in the 1960s, you would see nursing. They'd call your family doc at home or possibly a surgeon, depending on what your complaint was. But ER doctor wasn't a thing up until then. So the federal government getting involved and trying to set up a system whereby we provide uniform and hopefully very high quality care on the highways actually created EMS and hospital-based emergency medicine as part of that initiative. So it's been going on for a while. Now, to get to the crux of your question, the trauma centers. As part of the notion of standardizing high-quality care to try to save people from critical injury, we also established a program whereby we can identify how severe somebody's injuries are in the field and then take them to specialty hospitals. I have the pleasure to work not only at Carle, which is a level 1 trauma center, the highest level of trauma center designate, but also at Kirby, a small critical access hospital out in Monticello. And the reality is I'm the same ER doctor wherever I show up to work in the morning. And I can take care of the primary trauma problems equally well at either place. Where the level 1 center comes in is what there is beyond the ER. That is, there's a surgical team ready right away. There's an ICU that specializes and focuses in trauma. There's a comprehensive rehabilitation program. There's a program to train new surgeons. And studies have actually shown that for the lay person going to a hospital, you actually do better. You survive, you get better return of function if you go to a teaching hospital for any complaint than to other facilities. And so that teaching program is actually a fairly important part of it. But ultimately, trauma care is provided at every hospital in America. The goal of the trauma systems is to take the most critically injured patients to the facilities that have the highest capability to care for them, that is to match patients to the facility they need to go. And that's where trauma centers come in.
And so this is the only level 1 trauma center in our region?
It is the only level 1 in our region. There is a level 2 over in Decatur, Decatur Memorial. And level 1 and level 2 are actually very close in terms of the patient's ability to get comprehensive care quickly. But those are the 2 trauma centers currently operating in this region of the state, and there are more than a dozen more throughout the state elsewhere.
So it sounds like even though we're rural, we have pretty great hospitals in the area to go to.
Yeah.
So let's kind of pivot and talk about this care prior to an ambulance arriving. If I have a loved one who's had a medical emergency, can you kind of walk us through some of these steps?
Yeah, it's wise to not go too deeply into the rabbit hole of specific advice simply because every situation is different. And so the key thing I would reassure you is that care in the EMS system doesn't just begin when the vehicle with the light bar shows up in your driveway. Care within an EMS system begins with our dispatchers, the person picking up on the other end of 911. And so I would love it, and as a community, the communities would do better if every single citizen, regardless of whether you work in healthcare or you work at a library, if every single citizen took a CPR class, a basic first aid class, that would be great. But we recognize that all of us are busy, all of us have lots of obligations in life, and not everybody's going to do that. So we specifically train dispatchers to provide over the phone emergency medical guidance to people on the other end of the line. And that turns out to be incredibly important. In fact, there are data that have been shown that an emergency medical dispatcher giving CPR instructions for a victim of a cardiac arrest triples the likelihood that that person survives. That's just how big an impact it is. Wow. So in general, it is a good idea if somebody develops an acute injury or an acute illness to get them to a safe place if they're not at a safe place, to try to keep them warm, to try to keep them safe from anything in the environment that not hurt them, to not feed them or give them something to drink as long as that's not an obvious primary indication. And that's where we can get into that rabbit hole of generalizing too much. If it's a person who's diabetic and their blood sugar is low, something to eat might be actually exactly what they need. Exactly. But there are many situations where someone may need surgery once they get to the hospital that we'd like to avoid them consuming food to sit in their stomach before getting anesthesia. And again, that's really where the emergency medical dispatcher is going to help you out. So the biggest take-home message for your audience is, if you think someone is having an acute emergency and needs to get to the hospital in an emergency fashion, access the 911 system. That's why we all pay taxes for it to be there. Certainly, those dispatchers are going to send resources matched to whatever your emergency situation might be, and certainly they're going to give you some help and guidance over the phone as to what you can do until that professional trained help arrives.
And how important is it to, even when it feels like things are just chaos, but to try and remain calm while you're on the phone with a dispatcher?
Absolutely. And you can imagine that the telecommunicators answering on the 911 side have a challenging job. And it is not uncommon for people to call in absolutely panicked and out of breath, and sometimes even hysterical. But the dispatchers are trained in ways to mitigate that crisis and get the information they have to have out of the person. The address, the details, things they need to know, sending the rescuers into that scene. So yes, it is absolutely true that when you call 911, it is wise to check your own pulse and respirations. Try to take a deep breath and calm those things down when you call. But also don't delay calling, because the dispatcher is going to help walk you through that on the other end of the line, and they will tease out from you the information they need. It's really important to not just call, say, send help right now and hang up. It's really important to leave that line open as long as the dispatcher is on with you, because there may be things that they need to know, there may be things that the ambulance crew responding to you needs to know, that if that connection gets broken, sometimes we don't get those back. And so until the dispatcher tells you they're ready to hang up, stay on the line with them.
And it's kind of a different thing that we've seen over the last, I don't know, maybe decade or so, where a lot of folks don't have landlines anymore. They've just got cell phones.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Is that why it's so important to keep the phone line open? Or
it's important to keep the phone line open just because that is your link, that is your lifeline to somebody trained who can help you until professional rescuers arrive. E911 systems, enhanced 911 systems, the cell phones help us because of the ability to locate where you're at specifically. It's not that hard when we're sitting in a television studio to give a street address, but if one of us gets in an accident next month on a rural highway where we're not fully familiar with where we're at and we don't see a street sign because we're not close to an intersection, that cell phone can actually help us to find you. And so that's a big deal.
And I think that's something else to kind of tease out too, because recently it's become a little bit bigger that fire departments, EMS, are announcing, hey, make sure your house numbers are easily visible.
Absolutely
or,
true.
Maybe is it important to make sure that, I don't want to say do a full tidy before your EMTs arrive, but I mean, if they're trying to get a gurney in or something, should it be good to clear a path before they get there? Or?
We'll come into your house regardless of how clean or bad it looks. We're not really worried about the cosmetics. That said, you raise a salient point that think about what's going to happen when we do get there. If it's a person who can't walk on their own, we're going to bring a stretcher in and back out. And so clearing things from immediately in front of a door is a great idea. Putting pets away. I have a absolutely wonderful dog at home who loves me and the entire family and is fine with most strangers, but if there's a stressful situation and he understands that his owners are really stressed or panicked and now there's a stranger in the house, now I have an 80-pound dog who can potentially be dangerous to somebody. So when possible, putting pets away, putting them in a back bedroom, etc., even if they're usually the nicest pet in the world, because all of our companion animals sense when we're under a lot of stress, and that can make them react unpredictably.
And so if you're on the phone with a dispatcher, besides giving instructions about how to perform CPR, are there other common things that they'll typically walk you through? Sure,
they can help to walk you through bleeding control. If somebody has a significant injury that's bleeding, they can walk you through, if somebody has a burn, what the initial rudimentary care is that you're going to do for that. They can walk you through, say for a drowning victim, turning that person on their side, clearing their airway, doing rescue breathing if need be. There's a lot of different things they can do. But again, getting with the dispatcher's information on what happened leading up to the emergency, say for something like toxicology, your kid gets into grandma's pills, figuring out what it is that the person might be poisoned with. At the advanced level, our paramedics carry a number of different antidotes and reversal agents, and so there's extra information the dispatcher can sometimes get that will help our crews actually save that life once they arrive.
Or like if somebody has an allergic reaction and they might need like a EpiPen or something like that?
Sure, absolutely. If a person has history of allergic reactions and has their own EpiPens, giving those is something that can absolutely be essential to them, even surviving until the ambulance can get there. That's a category I'm glad you brought up, because true anaphylaxis, severe allergic reactions, are like flipping a light switch. They can happen so fast that you may not have the 10 minutes for the ambulance and the fire engine to get here. And so yeah, that's a situation much like CPR for full cardiac arrest, that giving some aid to that person before trained rescuers arrive can be incredibly important.
And what if you're in a situation, I know it's become a little bit more common for ambulances to carry like Narcan, the rescue drug.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the opioid crisis, people being addicted to opioid drugs, has been one of the most important public health crises in the United States for at least a decade. Several years ago, we passed the first time in America where overdoses of opioid medications surpass car accidents as cause of death in America. We now are losing more than 40,000 Americans per year due to drug overdoses of things like heroin and morphine, and common pills you might find in your own medicine cabinet like Percocet, Vicodin, and Norco. And so the good thing is there is an antidote, Narcan, or naloxone is a generic name, that can be given to those victims to reverse it and to allow them to survive that incident. That is a drug that is actually available over the counter. You don't even need a prescription. And so you can go to a local pharmacy and obtain it. And particularly if either you personally or if your family member has a history of dependency to one of these drugs, or even if you've got a family member who's not using them recreationally, but uses them medically for treatment of chronic severe pain, they are at risk by accident, not by intent of overusing the drug, but by accident of overdosing and needing a reversal agent. And so in those situations, Narcan can be given either by a nasal spray or by an auto-injector similar to Epi to reverse that opioid and get that person breathing again. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. That's another one of those drugs where it's important to let the dispatcher know what you think the problem might be, and if we're lucky enough that that drug is on scene, to go ahead and administer it.
And so what would you say to somebody who is maybe iffy about calling an ambulance, whether it be for that reason being,
Sure.
you know, because even though addiction is such a powerful, unfortunately, thing, people maybe are ashamed of that, or maybe people are worried about, can I afford being taken by ambulance? What would you say to maybe persuade them?
So the first thing I would say is to address a bit the legal component. The legal component is the time of a person who is in medical crisis from overdose is not a time that law enforcement pursues prosecution for illegal drug activity. When that happens, our goal and our sole goal is to save the victim of the overdose. And so I know that there is a nature of, my gosh, if we call, they're going to send the cops and we're going to be in trouble. But when it's in a situation of trying to save a person from an overdose, that's not a factor. And certainly the paramedics, the firefighters, the hospital staff are not going to call the cops and report you. We're going to try to treat you. And we treat addiction and overdose as an illness, not as a crime. And so that's the first thing I think that folks should understand is in that situation, our only goal is to make that person be okay and not die today. The next reality is that all of us, myself included, many times in my life have made bad choices. And the way that we overcome bad choices is by living to make a better choice the next day. And so if a person has used one of these drugs recreationally and overdosed, that was a bad choice that day. I want that person to have the chance to make a better choice tomorrow. The best way for them to get that is, you know, common sense, surviving today. And so giving those drugs is hugely important to reverse the overdose. The final thing is a reassurance is that some people might not be sure if it's an overdose of a opioid or not. If either you or I right now was to get a dose of Narcan, it would be nothing more than expensive water. It has no effect whatsoever in people who do not have an active overdose of an opiate. It's not something that there have been any reports of people being allergic to Narcan, and it's simply not going to cause any harm. So our medics are trained because they carry this drug on their response vehicles. If someone is unconscious from unknown reasons, and that might even be a possibility, just give the drug because there's truthfully no downside. If a person is unconscious and it's not due to an opioid overdose, you've literally given them a kind of expensive dose of water. In other words, the drug is somewhere in the range of $25 to $30. So we're not talking horrible medical expense here, but you're literally giving them something that's the physiological equivalent of water. You will not hurt somebody with Narcan.
And so in our last few minutes here, if I am somebody who maybe needs to use or administer an AED, but I have no experience in it, is that something that a paramedic or a 911 dispatcher can walk me through? Or
yeah, a dispatcher will absolutely walk you through using an AED. And for anyone listening who's not familiar, an AED is an automated external defibrillator. In other words, the machine you might see on a show like Grey's Anatomy that shocks a person to try to reset their heart rhythm. And so an AED is a machine that once you turn it on will have voice prompts come on that actually tell you from the device everything that you need to do, how to use the machine, what you need to do to interact with the machine during a case of CPR. The bottom line with AEDs, survival of cardiac arrest outside of hospitals in the United States is low. It's only about 12%. That's something TV gets wrong. Most people who die outside of a hospital are not resuscitated. There was a study, though, about placing a whole bunch of AEDs in an airport in a large city in the United States where they were immediately accessible by the public every few hundred yards. Survival of cardiac arrest inside that airport facility with lots and lots of AEDs around was 90%.
Incredible.
In other words, having the AED there to zap somebody's heart back into the right rhythm right away made success of resuscitation go up by 8-fold. So they're wonderful to have. If you're in a workplace that has one available, know where the heck the thing is and make sure you can access it, because none of us wants to be the person there on the day you need it. But if you need it, it's really, really good to know where the thing is, that the battery on it is charged, that it's been maintained, and to know that once you open it up and turn it on, the machine is going to help you, as of course will our dispatchers.
Fabulous advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Smith from Carle, for being on the show.
Appreciate you.
And we hope you'll join us for our next episode of Being Well.
Carle is redefining healthcare around you, innovating new solutions and offering all levels of care when and where you need it. Investing in technology and research to optimize healthcare, Carle, with Health Alliance, is always at the forefront to help you thrive.
For over 50 years, Horizon Health has been keeping you and your family healthy. And although some things have changed, Horizon Health's commitment to meet the ever-changing needs of our community has remained the same. Horizon Health, 50 years strong.
They're the ones who raise the bar. The ones dedicated to providing care in the most demanding of circumstances. The ones that understand the healing benefits of kindness and compassion. They're the people of Sarah Bush Lincoln, and they set the bar high. Sarah Bush Lincoln, trusted, compassionate care right here close to home.